I was tidying up my hard drive the other day, and I stumbled upon one of my old sound replacement projects from when I was in school. This was like 5, 6 years ago. And immediately upon listening to it, I started thinking of all the things that I would change with my new perspective on it. And I thought, hey, I'll make a video and show my feedback and revision process for the benefit if anyone finds it useful. So first of all, I know you just heard it in the intro, but let's take a listen to what the old project sounded like in its original state. So if you're anything like me, you probably noticed a few things that jumped out to you that you'd want to change about it. But before we dive straight into giving notes, let's outline a general goal for how we'll shape our feedback. This has already had a complete design pass. It's pretty stale at this point, but we don't need to reinvent it from scratch because the visuals haven't really changed and someone already made an intentional audio pass on this. So it's more about just making it the best version of itself than trying to reinvent the wheel here with what we have. So let's start talking about what I enjoyed about it. As you can see, the weapon itself, sure, it's got some extra tech elements going on, but it reads as an assault rifle upon first glance, and it seems pretty grounded. So I enjoyed how in the design, the balance of grounded elements to more futuristic elements feels on point to me. If we listen again, pay attention to how like the mech and center ballistic gunfire feels balanced against some like the high zippy laser parts in there. I would say first and foremost, it reads as an assault rifle, and then secondarily, there's all the extra energy stuff going on, and I enjoy that. Something else I enjoyed was all the little details going on. It has a first shot sweetener, meaning that the first shot fired has a little extra punch. You can even see it just by looking at the waveform here. And there's also a last shot sweetener in here as well, the little mech element at the end, to let us know that the last shot has been fired. We can also hear what sounds like metal pings for the shells being ejected during the automatic fire. There's also a low ammo indicator as you get lower in the magazine and the ammo starts going into the red. You can feel it starts feeling more hollow. It's subtle but tasteful, and I enjoy that. And the sync on all the reload elements is very tight to the picture. You can see mag out, mag in, and the little charging hammer. I actually don't know anything about guns, so I'm just talking out my ass here, but when he pulls back the thing and it snaps back into position, that feels really nice. There's also a very minimal ambience going on. It's just like a background bed to make sure that isn't silence. You could argue it's maybe not necessary for something that you'd put in a sound replacement reel, but I think it's nice and helps cover some of the gaps. And also there's a little bit of effort made into doing some reflections in the little tail at the end. You can hear that little ring out and in between the shots. Sounds like a little bit of reflection going on. That helps give us a sense of space. Now let's talk about what we would change. And I'm going to keep it pretty light on the audio jargon here because, we hire skilled sound designers to solve creative problems. So if we're overly prescriptive about our feedback and telling them exactly what to do, that's sort of robbing them of the creative freedom of solving the problem on their own. Rather, I like to have a more descriptive approach to say how it feels and how that might be off base from what our creative goals would be. So the first thing that really pokes out to me, you could argue that on the end of the weapon, it has what looks like a silencer at the end of the barrel, in which case maybe you'd expect it to not have really present body and reflections, but that's sort of unclear. And either way, just gut response listening to it, it feels kind of thin, and it leaves me wanting more bodies and reflection and tail and beef overall. It feels just kind of dry and sterile at the moment. The other thing I noticed, and it'll really poke out to you if you look at the spectrum analyzer, is that between the shell pings, the tech elements, and all the mech going on, the brightness just gets kind of prickly and fatiguing over time and feels overly present to me. Looking at the reload as well, although the sync is very tight, I feel like it's just kind of flat, lacks character, and it is maybe a bit too standard and conventional for my taste. I think the reload offers an opportunity for selling more of the high-tech fantasy here that's sort of missed in the current version of this. And also going back to the fires for a second, if we look at the muzzle flash and you see the VFX going on, there's like these electrical arcing sort of sparks coming out that point or allude to some sort of electrical fantasy happening here, and I feel like that doesn't really read well in what I'm hearing with the fires. Okay, so let's put our designer hat back on and dive into the session proper now. So I'm going to start by disabling the mix bus and all the mastering happening up there. And we're going to start by looking just at, I took the base version of the original sound replacement and just dragged it down here. And I did a little bit of processing to it, but this is going to be the core and foundation of our design because ultimately we want to retain the original vision for what the sound should be. And we're just going to augment and add some supplements on top of it. But first we need to carve space. So I started by doing I took away some volume for the first shot sweetener because we're going to spice that up later. For the initial processing, I just started with some soothe to control some of the top end. You can hear without it. With it, you can see it's really digging in deep there. You can also cross reference with the analyzer to get confirmation. And then some series EQ happening as well. This is to give us back some more body down here, especially in the low end, to get rid of some of the crud below 30 hertz. Again, tame, just broadband some of the high frequencies. And there's also a dynamic band, dynamic in the sense that it's automated, happening at 561. That is getting driven down to minus 14 dB as we get low in the magazine to make room for some of the energy elements later on to poke through. So we can listen to that. Then I just applied some multiband compression. This is a preset that I made that sort of emulates the default Wave C4 compressor, multiband compressor. It's just to even it out a little bit more, and you can see it'll mostly be controlling the high end. So now that we've carved away space, let's start talking about what we can add. And the first thing I want to address here is this early reflections return I built in. So I routed about, minus 13 sent from this base recording we just heard over to this early reflections return. What we have going on over here is, first and foremost, there's a convolution going on. I'm just using M convolution easy because I'm not very smart, so I can only handle the easy version of this. But we're just using the early reflection number 5, 100% wet, obviously, with a little bit of pre-delay and widen slightly to get that sound. And then we have some EQ. That's to bring forward the mid-range and cut down on some of that high end again. I'm really being judicious about how I manage the high end. You can see, again, I'm doing more dynamic reduction here. And overall, this is to account for the fact that if you look in the video, there's we're in a corridor, there's 2 stone walls on either side of the listener, and those would be quite reflective in a real world setting. So this is my attempt to account for that. And we're gonna be sending stuff, not just this base version, but all the other additions we made as well to this early reflections return as we work our way down through the session. So let's start by looking at this tails sub here. It sounds comical in isolation there, but you can trust me, this really adds a lot for giving us a sense of space and sort of filling out the body a little bit more. So if we take a look inside this sub-project, that might have been soloed, that might be a mistake. But we just have 2 basic layers here. We have a real gun tail from my friend Gabe. Using these recordings, I used them also in that 1 Gun 3 Styles video I did a while ago, but we've just taken off the transient here. So initially quite poppy, but I just shaved off that transient because I just want the reflection. Ideally, we would use a recording that was in like an urban landscape like we saw in the video, but I don't have access to that, so we're just making do with what we have. We also have a firework explosion recording from Nikolaj Dahan. Sorry if I mispronounced your name there. And we've done a similar thing here. We've just shaved off the initial transient. And then I've gone ahead and done some bus processing on both of those. Pretty standard stuff, just a recenter to bring it up the middle, removing the transient. Because we have enough transient as it is in the base design. Some heavy compression with the tape emulation. That's also reducing the dynamics and bringing up the sustain a bit, and just a safety limiter. Now we've gone ahead and made 8 variations of these. And then with the way NVK sub-projects works, I've just copy, pasted, randomized those 8 variations across all of our automatic fires so that any adjustments we make in the sub-project will be reflected here. And we don't have to readjust a whole bunch of layers as we're doing as we're messing around with our design. This is pretty standard for how I like to approach automatic weapon mockups, and it saves a lot of time and just like session wrangling. The only other thing I'll point out here is I added 2 additional layers for when the automatic fire stops and we let the tail ring out. This is another firework recording from Valentine C, with some flanger going on to give it a little bit of futuristic flavor, also with some heavy filtering. And another one of the gun tails from Gabe's recordings. It's just his recenter. Pro Q. I can talk about this a little bit. This is upwards compression. So if we look in the effects list with this disabled, it sort of tapers off pretty quickly. But with this going on, you can see it increases the volume as it starts to taper off, which gives us a little bit more sustain in practice. You could probably accomplish the same thing with just the transient shaper and the sustain turned up, but that just happens to be what I used in this case. So let's do a little checkpoint and listen to just the tails and body additions along with the early reflections and the bass version here. You can see that's already coming a long way and giving us what we want. But let's keep going and let's take a look at this energy character sub project that we have here. There's a little bit more going on. Let's take a look inside of the sub project. So here's a little pitfall that I see a lot of early in career sound designers fall into. They try and make unique variations for every layer, for every sound that they do. Sometimes that's just not necessary, and sometimes it actually detracts from the design. So in this case, I literally have one variation for this asset, this energy character layer. And it's really simple. So I just have, let's disable all the effects processing for now. This little design thing from my library that I'm probably going to release at some point. And there's variations built into the file. I made the conscious decision that I only wanted that first variation. I just beefed it up a little bit with transient shaping. First one is a slow speed attack turn up and sustain turn down, and the second one is a fast speed attack turn down. That's to eliminate the initial click while still giving it overall punch. And the other layer here is also pretty subtle. This is a reversed kick from that UI session that I showed you guys a little while ago. And all I did there is I added a GRM shift to smear it a little bit. Then combined, and with our bus processing. Then what I did back in the main session is, you can see it's just the same variation over and over, but for the last few ones, I increased the pitch by a few semitones to give it that rising feeling, and I also increased the volume up to about 9 dB towards the last shot, just to emphasize this a little bit more and change the delta between the base fire and the energy character as we get low in the magazine. So in isolation again. Then mixed in with our other elements that we just heard. Pretty good. Let's take a look at these extra sweeteners I added down here. So remember, I carved out some space in the base version, the first shot sweetener, so I added some more stuff down here to account for that. What we have is, I believe I just stole these from my gun session as well. So we have a little kick drum, a little reversed zap here, and then a little energy layer. Not too much going on in the processing wise, just some transient turned up, and this is just my standard Saturn into Pro L. But of note, I guess, is that that little reversed zap happens one frame before pretty much everything else. There's also just some mech stuff in the base version. It's a really subtle thing, but I think you really do feel it in the end result. And it gives just a little extra flair and a tiny little lead into that first shot that feels pretty nice. Then we also spiced up the last shot as well. There's a little bit more going on here. So you can see we added some gun mech. Again, this is from Gabe's recording. Looks like a Ruger Mini 14. Hear that in isolation. We also have, this is one of those energy layers, again, from my other gun design session. With a little bit of, sounds like some flanging happening in there. I think this is a similar thing. We can maybe bring up the volume, hear that a little bit louder. Yeah, this is from that same gun session from my separate video. It's okay to copy paste stuff and reuse things. I think that's part of a part of the magic of sound design is how you can repurpose and use things in different contexts. Another element from my library that I'm going to release when I get around to it. I wanted to have something that really sold that like electrical crackling sort of sound. So this was the original without the processing. Pretty heavy. So I add an EQ just to reduce some of that low end below 400 hertz. And I really just wanted that crackling bit there. So that's just what I pulled out. It's subtle, but you definitely feel it. So again, let's hear all that stuff mixed in. And the last bit of additions that we're going to talk about is the reload. So again, I'm working from the base version here. We just did some processing, mostly, you guessed it, staying the high end. But also of note, I resynced it a little bit. So what I wanted some more space between the pulling the charging handle back and it snapping into place. Originally it was like this, but I just spaced it out by 3 frames or so. So that sounds like this. It sounds very odd with those gaps of silence. So this is just a side note, but I took the ambience from like later on in the original clip when there's just nothing going on, and I like copy pasted it up here to sort of blend it over. We can hear both of those elements together. It's a little bit smoother, and it'll sound even more smooth as we continue down the line. But yeah, the processing that I did here, again, we're looking to tame the high frequencies, maybe bring back some of the body. I noticed that the reload felt maybe a little bit too small in scale for what the size of the weapon actually is, so I just added some more around 360. I also decreased the stereo width. Reloads, for the most part, if not completely mono, should be really narrow. I also did a subtle note. I panned it ever so slightly to the right, I believe. And then, once again, I just applied some soothe on the top. From there, I added some additional layers. I'm going to try and shout out all the people I pulled these from, but there's a lot in here. There's some more mech from Gabe's recordings, again. There's some of my recordings. This is a combination lock, jingling, and just like some camera Foley. Some additional transient shaping. I'll point out here, this has low air applied to it. Just a little touch of it. We can hear it without, and then with. This is to emphasize the main, let's say, the climax of the reload, which I want to be when the mag gets reinserted into the weapon. I also want to add some resonance to make it feel like it's, because you have the weapon braced against your chest as the listener in the video. So I want it to feel like something maybe hitting against you to give it a little bit more weight and impact there. So that's how I use low air. And some more camera Foley. Just subtle stuff here. I also added some subtle tech elements, some little bleepies. This is from my UI session that I did a video on just a little bit ago. Doesn't have to be anything extreme, but this can go a long way to selling the fantasy. And then once again, I added a bunch of additional Foley stuff just to cover the gap between our main beats. So we have mag out, mag in, charging handle, but then there's blank space between there. And it can feel really sterile if you have nothing going on. So I added just the camera lock and some Foley from Rob Price to sort of cover that gap and give us a sense of cohesion. And some more box cutter jingling. It feels really subtle, but you got to trust me, it makes a whole world of difference. With Foley editing, it's usually about subtle notes to give it a sense of detail. And then the last little bit of flavor, I have a weapon hum charge passed by short from Owen Ronkin from the Sci-Fi crowdsource. Again, this is a really subtle thing. I think the original recording went a little something more like, I just trimmed it up and sped it up a little bit to give it more of a pitch curve, and then mixed it down just to give a subtle charge up sound and again play into that electrical fantasy. So let's listen to those additions. And then the bus processing I did on there was just some more high frequency control and yeah, standard clipper limiter setup. And then mixed in with our original reload. That's feeling a lot better, and it feels like it has an energy curve. Like there's the mag out, and then it dips down, but then it builds up to the mag back in, and then it finally does a small dip, and then once again up into the charging handle release. And you can see the ammo's refilled at the end, just a little transient confirmation to let us know that the weapon's ready to fire. And that feels really tactile and nice to me. So final bit we're going to look at here is the mastering, but real quick, we're going to listen to the whole thing all together without our mastering applied. Then we're going to start off with our base. This is a tiny subtle change. It's mostly acting on the automatic fire. It's not really hurting the reload, but too much of it would be like this. I just want a very subtle amount of bass added from all the elements combined. So it's not just isolated bass, it's some sort of composite bass. Then I controlled that low end a little bit more with our transient shaper. Attack up, sustain down, set to the fastest setting. Again, this is mostly acting on the weapon fire. Crossover at 300, and then similar thing going on the top end as well. This is to help us retain some of the punch that we had in the original base version of this. And then I did Pro Q. We're doing a lot of subtraction here. Really trying to rebalance things. I guess of biggest note is the low pass filter at 18K. And it starts shelving off even before 18K, somewhere around 10 kilohertz. You can see before this, there's still a lot of supersonic information going on that we don't need. And by reducing this, we can give us some more headroom to work into the limiter and additional processing after this. Then we have Gullfoss. Again, you can see it's mostly taming the high end, just keeping things under control. So this was a nice touch. I added the ozone multiband imager here. You can see what I have it doing is turning down the width on the low end, turning up the width in the mid-range just a little bit, and then really turning up the high end quite a bit. If we listen to if we just go back and listen to the original one more time, you can see overall it's pretty narrow and focused, and it's not usually a problem, but I want this to bloom a little bit in the sides, especially in the high end, so that's why I just made this change here. Particularly in the tail, you can really feel that ring out in the sides, and that feels pretty nice. Then our standard clipper and our limiter, adding almost 9 dB of gain. It's not actually clipping, don't look at that. And yeah, that's our whole mix. So let's go ahead and listen to the before and after one more time. Personally, I like that a lot better. I would have loved to have some actual gun recordings in urban space to use for the reflections, but I think we did a pretty good job with what we had on hand. So for those of you still listening, I realize that this was a bit of a departure from my usual content. So I'm curious, please let me know if you found this valuable. I was tossing around the idea of opening up for viewer content submissions, so all of you listening, to do this in the same feedback style, but honestly, I wasn't sure if a public YouTube video is the best format for that. So ultimately, I just wanted to work with my own material here. But yeah, I'm open to suggestions here. Let me know what you think. And I've still got plenty more material in the backlog of old sound replacements I've done that I can do a similar update pass on.